Are you filming now?
Oh, they're in perfect synchronization.
Are they? But you can hear your own voice. Only it's late zone.
Yeah.
Hello. How you doing, Ringo? I'm all right.
We were just like, we're in America. America.
It's great being here in New York. Okay.
Washington.
Oh, is that the place? I don't know. Washington. I'm just moving so fast.
They wanted to know everything about America, the food, the groups, the dancing, and they loved it.
It was like being in the eye of a hurricane. It was happening to us, and it was hard to see.
They were the first white group that I had ever heard in my life say, yeah, we grew up listening to black music.
We think they're just great, especially their hair, too.
I think there's something very strange about it at the same time, something very sick.
My sister had the radio on, and I heard the Beatles. It's like total darkness. And then the light comes on. I was like, oh, my God, something for us.
We could get the camera down on this mic, it'd be a real laugh. How about go on? Defy convention.
I think the craziness was going on in the world and in the band. You know, we were kind of normal and the rest of the world was crazy. Everybody got into the mania whenever the Beatles came to town.
When we came, it was quite shortly after Kennedy had been assassinated. Maybe America needed something like the Beatles to be lifted out of sorrow.
The elixir that they put together is so profound. It wasn't just about the songs. It was the power of music to transform lives.
The girls crying, their paint falling out. What they crying for?
What do you like about the Beatles?
We just like the Beatles because they're English. Do you think they're very English?
I think we're jolly English, actually.
You know you should be
Sure. Hi, guys.
Hey, Adam.
What a treat to talk to you but also to see the documentary.
Thank you.
Great.
Really enjoyed it. Yeah. I found it very moving, actually. I wasn't expecting to be choked up and kind of moved to tears a couple of times. Never put the context of the JFK assassination as sort of the with my, all the popular culture aspects of 1964 and the Beatle mania and that, you think about their arrival, the Ed Sullivan Show and all that, but there's this other context that you guys gave the film and it seems to really work perfectly. And and it makes it much more moving and rich. How did that come about?
Well,
that decision, I guess.
I'm going to toot David's horn a little bit before he
toot away, please.
But, David, what he and Marty do so brilliantly is to take these kind of moments, musical moments, cultural moments,
right,
moments in society, and just put them into really profound context, right? So when you see these moments in history, a lot of times it's kind of like everything else is left out, right? You just see the Beatles arriving and the girls screaming, but to know what was happening in, whether it's New York City in February 1964, 3 months after the assassination of JFK, or in No Direction Home, what was it like in Greenwich Village when Dylan lands, in New York? And so I just think it's kind of inimitable what they do to kind of bring that emotion to the fore.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of archive. It's I don't know if I should say mostly archive this film, but it's substantial archive taken from the Maysles brothers. And by the way, so fortunate I got to know Al Maysles the last bunch of years of his life, and he did this podcast when I first started. So very lucky to have this beautiful guy, and but Yeah, with all this great art, I appreciated how you took the archive and then through that you wove a story, as opposed to, as you put it just now, Margaret, of um, just kind of throwing it out there, which works too, by the way. It's so fantastic. But I like how you can look at all these hours of footage and you can actually weave various stories from it that apply to what was going on at the time. And because I have here a question I wanted to ask you, and maybe David, you can respond to this one, and that is like, what is your roles in this kind of film as a director, and Margaret as a producer in this type of film, which is mostly archive but also has interviews? Like, what are you doing there?
That's a really good
I
question.
mean, it's very basic because I
I'm
mean,
not quite sure how to answer it. I had a vision for the film, and it's essentially the film you see. And that vision was something that when Apple Corps reached out to us, I talked to them about, what I thought we could do. Um, I didn't um, I didn't know who we could actually get to interview. I hadn't seen all the Maisels footage, so I didn't know what was actually in that treasure trove of footage. But I had a feeling about the impact that the Beatles had on me and many, many people I know. The kind of the joy and the healing quality of their music and how it was life-changing.
that's really a lovely response. As you finish saying what you just articulated so well, I was thinking of that woman, one of the um, folks that were screaming. This one of the when she was a young woman or girl, she was one of those
Vicky.
scream. Yeah, and
Yeah.
she talked about how even to this day, where she hears a Beatles song and it just takes 100% of her attention and she can't focus on anything else. She has to pull
Oh,
over or stop what she's doing
yeah.
and just
Yeah.
be in that moment. And that was really profound to hear somebody say that. Like, I
That was
almost
Jamie.
admired
Yeah.
her or was, a little bit jealous of her, to be honest, to have that kind of love of and recognition of how much it impacted her life. That's a beautiful thing. What a great moment.
Yeah, Jamie Bernstein really brought a lot of intelligent analysis to a very emotional time in her life. And when for me, David, I think early on we were looking for people like Jamie and Jack Douglas and Joe Queen and people who could really, I mean, Joe and Jamie are writers, people who could really articulate, and Jane Thompson too, who could articulate in a thoughtful way. And when Jamie tells the story about her dream with George Harrison, her favorite Beatle at that
The bra.
time, right? Which then later shifted to John. Um, and as a woman and as someone who was a 13 or 16-year-old girl at that time, whatever it was, those early romantic, obsessive love, kind of early sexual feelings are rarely really talked about in any way that's thoughtful and kind of honest like that. And so, I think bringing that aspect of who were these young screaming girls, because they were onto something, right? They knew this band was different and special, and they followed them as their music evolved and as that decade evolved. So I think giving voice to that part of the story is something that I think and hope that the film reveals.
And when we looked at the Maisels footage for the first time, um, those, young girls on the street and what they had to say jumped out to us,
Hmm.
because I felt like I had never seen young women talking so insightfully and so in the moment about what was going on, you know. So it was a revelation for me. And I thought it worked well with the interviews that we filmed.
Yeah. You mentioned before, David, that you didn't know going into the project like what interviews you might get. So when you got the two surviving Beatles, that must have
Well,
kind
Apple
of said, "Ooh, good gamble on my." Not that you're going to say no to Martin Scorsese, but
Apple Corps is one of the producing partners on the
tell
film.
people what that is.
Uh, it's the company that the Beatles started in the late 60s.
Mhm.
Um, and they own the negatives for the
Okay.
main footage. And we hoped that Paul and Ringo would do interviews. And we did everything we could. I mean, Paul, of course, had the Eye of the Storm exhibit first in London and then at the Brooklyn Museum. And it's his photographs from 1964. So he
Really,
was already thinking about
yeah,
this
it was
period of time.
smart way to do it.
Thank you. And Ringo, I mean, he says it himself, I'm a hoarder. We wanted to do something that wasn't just a sit-down interview. And he has a drum kit from Sullivan. He has some of the clothes he wore in that first US visit, along with, the Hey
The drum
Jude,
kit, yeah.
everything else. He brought the camera that he took some of his photographs with, you know. Um, so it was lucky. And I think that both Paul and Ringo had new things to say.
Oh my goodness. I mean, I have to say something about that because as somebody who's watched countless hours of both of those guys on camera, and they are both spent 70 years at this point, or 60 plus years. Um, yeah, sure, you're excited that you got them involved and they're producers of the film, but executive producers, but at the same time, then you're like, oh my God, now how do I make them pop? How do we, elevate the situation? Because they are so camera ready, both those guys. They've got their camera ready personalities. How do we get beyond that? And you managed to. And I was even worried when somebody asked, I think probably David, it was you, but you asked Paul, what would you say to the two surviving, if John or George were still around, what would you say to them? And that could have been such a I don't know, could have been it could have been a difficult situation, where you might have just gotten the same old stuff, but there you had a moment of real vulnerability from Paul McCartney, which brought, again, I said earlier, I was moved, and I didn't think I could be moved by anything anymore like that. And his response, even though it was so straightforward and so obvious, was very, really powerful,
And I would say that for all of them. And that was a big surprise for me, meaning John and George, we only have in archival, but
right.
they have very grounded, down to earth observations, nothing so crazy. And yet, from those very simple observations, they're able to explain something that's pretty complex. And I thought that was fascinating. They're very in the moment. I loved when they asked George, were you guys really going crazy on this story? It's like, no, we were normal and we had each other. The whole world went crazy around us.
That's great. Yeah.
Yeah.
I should mention, and I will have already done so before this, but that Beatles 64, directed by David Tedeschi and produced by, among others, by Margaret Bodde.
Bodhi.
Bodde will be premiering on Disney Plus exclusively as of November 29th, which is as we speak next Friday. But Margaret, I asked David before he responded to what his role was, which was basically executing his vision, which he managed to do. What was your role essentially, if you can bring it?
Yeah, well, as you know, as the producer, you're kind of involved in everything from the beginning to the very end, and that includes, all of the deals and the business and the budget and all the kind of nuts and bolts, making a movie kind of.
Sure.
But being that I've worked with Marty and David for over 20 something years, we all work pretty closely and well together. And so,
Wow.
I kind of have a feel for things that David might be interested in, approaches he might want to take with, just certain kinds of research that you're looking for, and everything filtered through the idea on a film like this, on such a famous, there's probably no more famous group of musicians in the world. How do you find anything that hasn't been seen a million times, right? So, kind of leading the charge on a global, worldwide search for fan footage, archival footage. We have this moment in our kind of film format history where a lot of the archives, internationally and in the US, have 16 millimeter news footage that exists, but it maybe hasn't been transferred yet. So, we're always looking for, like, can we go back? It's been seen, but it was seen in 1964. So, can you go back to that beautiful format
Mhm.
and, transfer that and access that for the film, along with, the beautiful 8 millimeter footage we found from a super fan who was the first president of the US Beatles fan club, Joe Shiroff, who is in the film. He's in the Maisels footage, running alongside the car with his 8 millimeter
Wow. Yeah.
camera pointing into the limo. And you see Paul in this kind of beautiful 8 millimeter color footage. And it's wonderful because you see, like, these fans are seeing them in color. These fans,
Yeah.
the
Right.
Beatles are in
Right.
color.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah. No, there was colors, right? 8 millimeter. I mean, going back to post-war period or during the war,
yeah.
or something like,
Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
when
Yeah.
black and white was pretty much ubiquitous otherwise, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And you contrast that with this gorgeous Maisels footage that's restored for this film.
Right.
And it just creates this nice dynamic of kind of personal and artful, going together. But yeah, so basically the role is to kind of facilitate and help David achieve
Right.
the vision that he set for the film.
Well, your work to kind of where things maybe converge and you have a Venn diagram is like your work with the Film Foundation must come in awfully handy, that what you know from there in terms of that footage as you're talking about it.
Absolutely.
That's something I've been trying for years to do something with that on that subject, by the way, because
Oh,
film preservation is such a
yeah.
important topic to what I, try to do with this
Yeah.
platform.
We'd love to talk about that sometime,
Yeah.
anytime. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I think I had some emails at one point, so I'll dig them out or see if I don't know, but I would love to do that. Um, and I might be nearing towards the end of what I've had prepared here, other than to say that it's, as you describe it, is a very sober film. I mean, it's going to be a lot of fun for anybody who's, ever had, a just an affection for the Beatles. This is a really going to be a fun experience, but it's also a little bit more of a sober, or what's the right word for it? It's not solemn, but I have to say there's that aspect. It doesn't get clinical at all, but it is it feels like a different project. So, like, um, than what I've seen before on this subject. Gratefully so. You know,
Yeah. In
uh,
in what way are you thinking in terms of the historical context we were trying?
yeah, I think there's that, and maybe it's the distance, or I don't know. It might just be the time we're living in at the moment. I'm not sure,
Yeah.
but it's
And
harkening
and the
back to that.
age.
It's harkening back
Yeah.
to, yeah, where we're at, us folks that are like myself, born in the late 63. I was born into this period myself. I was
Yeah.
born 2 months before the Kennedy assassination.
Yeah.
So it's
Wow.
very personal. But
Yeah.
Martin Scorsese is involved in this film, right?
Yes.
From what I understand.
Yeah.
I'm being
Marty's
facetious. How
Marty's
much
yeah,
was
Marty's a
he?
producer.
What? I know, I know. But what was, how much was he really involved here? I know you. I'm just not challenging his involvement at all when I ask that. I'm just actually curious to know, like, how much hands-on type of guy is he?
He's a hands-on creative producer.
Okay, yeah.
As you know, I co-directed two documentaries with him. Personality Crisis with David Johansen and the 50 Argument of the New York Review of Books. But this is the first time I've gone solo. And Marty, there were a lot of conversations in the beginning about what could be done. We talked, what does a director do? A director has a vision for the film. And he helped put together the vision. And then we would show him cuts. We would talk about who we were going to interview. And of course, he was very interested in the footage, the Maisels footage. He knew both Scorsese and I knew the Maisels at different points. So Scorsese first worked with them in the 60s. And then, of course, he hired Al Maisels to shoot.
I'm sorry, I'm interrupting. I'm sorry.
He hired Al Maisels to do behind the scenes rehearsal stuff for Shine Light. And we also hired him for the 50-year argument. And I PA'd for the Maisels when I was starting out, occasionally.
Wow. Yeah.
And then I chose to shadow Al during Shine Light, and really to get a feeling for what he did and how did he get these great moments from Keith Richards or whoever. I'd say, Margaret, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I just, you met Al. I think anyone who met Al over the years, especially, living in New York, he was ubiquitous, any kind of, cool event. I spent a festival, just hanging on, I was like a fan, just hanging out with Al and at the Full Frame Documentary Film Festival. He was, he's an octogenarian, had more energy than any of us, and just was the thing about Al is, he loved people. He loved people. He was doing exactly what he should be doing because he brought that love of humanity and the fascination with people to every frame. And so, you could see that in this footage and any of the films that David and Al on his own made, that there's just a love of people and an interest in what they have to say.
Yeah.
And he was not a filmmaker who was like, distant in any way. He wanted to get right in there, and just be with people and capture that.
Well, thank you both very much. This was really, really.
Thank you, Adam.
Great to talk to you.
Same here. Thank you for
Take care.
treat. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.